Type Podcast Studios.
Hi, welcome to the FFS podcast by Fortuna Female Society. I'm your host, Laura Bevan, and we have two fantastic guests for you today as we ask, why the FFS do we need to talk about domestic abuse? So first of all, I'm going to introduce you to lovely Caroline White,
Hello.
who is a local resident and author of this fantastic book, What is Domestic Abuse? So Caroline, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wrote the book?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate it. So I've worked in frontline domestic abuse now for almost 7 years. I've worked as a risk identification officer, outreach worker, and more recently as an IDVA, or independent domestic violence advocate, as that's better known. And one of the things that has really stood out to me during my time on the front line is the lack of knowledge around domestic abuse, not just with the clients I work with, but also professionals that I work with as well. So that was the inspiration behind it.
Well, I've had a read of it and I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I know lots of people have been giving some great feedback on it as well. So you've touched a bit on your professional background there. So was it professionally the reason why you decided to write it, or was it as you were talking to people out in the community and things like that?
A little bit of both, really. I think it was, again, seeing the lack of knowledge just from people I was working with, the professionals, and again from my younger self, I suppose, as well. Me 10 years ago wouldn't have had a clue about any of this.
Yeah.
So I've picked up a lot of knowledge and experience in my time working in domestic abuse, and I think it's so important, this knowledge that I've picked up, that it needs to be shared. And I couldn't find another book out there that was like my one that I've written. And I just think it was really important that we needed a step-by-step clear guide that explains things like coercive control, because it's a phrase that's thrown around so frequently now, coercive control, but very few people still really understand what it's about and what it means. So I collected quite a lot of examples in my book, as you probably realise from reading that chapter, that just explains how it presents itself in everyday life, obviously in domestic abuse situations.
That's amazing. I think it's a good time to bring you in, Jo, if you don't mind introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hi, so I'm Jo Jones. I'm one of the trustees of the Fortuna Female Society, but I'm also Deputy Chief Executive of the local Citizens Advice. So we work a lot with a lot of local people, some of them very vulnerable. And as Caroline just touched on there, with especially coercive control, we see that people don't actually realise that they're in a domestic abuse kind of situation, and that is part of it. So part of the work we've been doing is to kind of raise awareness of us being a support service for that particular client group.
Yeah, well, I think that for me with the book, as you say, when people don't realise quite often, and I think some of the beauty in it is almost the simplicity, and it's not that we're trying, you know, what you're doing with that, and obviously in the work that we do at FFS and what you're doing at 𝗙𝗵, we're not trying to sort of dumb down or explain to people, but sometimes people become so normalised in the situations that they find it difficult to identify it. I mean, I know recently it was published that Halton was one of the highest rates for incidents of domestic abuse. Is that something that you've been seeing at Citizens Advice?
Yeah, and that's only the stuff that's reported, isn't it, as well? There's a lot of stuff that goes unreported, and sometimes people don't meet the threshold for the IDVA service and things like that, and that's the stuff that's really worrying.
Have you found that with feedback that you're getting on from the book? That
Yes, I think it's still sort of brushed under the carpet. You know, there's a lot of focus on it now in the media, more so than ever. A lot of focus from the government perspective as well, but still not enough. I don't think there needs to be more. It needs to be something that is not taboo, because it was always such a taboo. It's something that goes on behind closed doors. You don't talk about it. It was legal as well until quite recently.
Yeah,
and I mentioned that in the book as well about the law around rape within a marriage.
Yeah.
was only made illegal in 1994 in England and Wales. I mean, that's within my lifetime, which is shocking.
I've got to admit, it blew my mind. I was at a training course recently and they covered that, and yeah, I was astounded really that was the case.
Exactly. So it's still very recent. 1994 was only 32 years ago. It's not that long ago. And even so, and coercive control was only made a criminal offence just over 10 years ago as well. That's very recent. You know, it's still not enough. More needs to be done. It needs to be completely eradicated, and we just need to do more.
So do you think that's a bit of a lack of understanding? You've both touched on coercive control though. Can you, perhaps Caroline, explain a little bit more about what it talks about in the book around coercive control?
So I've done a whole chapter on coercive control, which explains in like the legal definition of what it means, but also I've given quite a lot of different examples of what domestic abuse coercive control looks like. All of the examples I've used in the book are examples that I've actually come across in my own work. They're all real life examples. Obviously no names have been mentioned, of course. Yeah. But yes, and I think because they're the most common ones that I've come across, I think somebody who was picking the book up for the first time who might be in that situation would probably read through it and be able to pick out at least one or two, maybe more, that relates to them, particularly around things like financial abuse, which is also a form of coercive control, and around child contact as well. Children are used to control the other parent very often. Not always, but more often than not. So I think I put that in there to make it more realistic, because you can read the definition of coercive control and it's quite easy to explain, but it's not easy to understand. So that's why I chose to go into a little bit more depth. And I've had quite a lot of good feedback about that from people who've read it, who've said, actually, now that you've given me these examples, I get it. So, yeah.
So do you think really it could be used as well as for individuals, but for professionals? Because I'm just thinking, Jo, you know, we've talked about, you know, the piece of work that was done in coercive control. Do you find it something that you have difficulties having conversations with, if you can kind of identify it with people and they struggle in themselves? Or
Yeah, sometimes because they just genuinely don't realise that's the situation that they're in. And you touched there on financial abuse. Obviously, we do a lot of work with debt clients and things like that. And quite often that's something that flags up, that they are actually victims of financial abuse. You know, people taking out debts, loans and things in their name and getting them into debt. We've seen clients who've actually left a domestic abuse situation and they have literally been left with thousands and thousands of pounds worth of debt from things that they didn't take out, they didn't know they'd taken out. So it's,
So how do you think this could help people, the book that you've written? What do you think the main kind of takeaways for people will be?
Just raising awareness, even if it's for somebody who might be in a situation right now that would be classed as abusive. They could read this and think, oh, actually, this is what I'm experiencing. You know, beforehand, they may not have had any idea that what they were going through was abusive, because it may not necessarily be physical. A lot of people still think that domestic abuse is actually domestic violence, when actually...
I was going to touch on that, because I think that is the big thing. And I think that, again, that's the difficulty for people, isn't it? Is I don't know if you've seen the film, I think it's Made, the American film, and when she's challenged and she says, but he didn't hit me, because like, you could take this forward, this is a situation, and that for me was really a bit of a light bulb moment, because I thought, we're not having these conversations. People kind of think, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, he didn't do this, and I've not had a bruise, but quite often, you know, even to get to that stage, there'll have been a whole host of this other sort of abuse going on beforehand, I think.
Definitely. And sometimes in a lot of situations that I've come across in my professional life, working in domestic abuse, some of the worst cases I've come across, there's never been anything physical that's happened, but there's been coercive control, stalking, emotional abuse, psychological damage, PTSD. But because there's never been a physical assault, they don't really see it as domestic abuse, because they're still thinking it's domestic violence, which is a very archaic term now. And even my job title as independent domestic violence advocate is still a little bit archaic as well. It's changing, really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's around switching that shame, isn't it? I mean, we've talked in previous podcasts around, you know, just the whole sort of violence against women and girls situation as a whole. And sometimes for me, and I don't know how you two feel about this, but I think almost having domestic abuse or domestic violence as its own separate entity is this kind of thing that we don't talk about, and it was behind shut doors, and quite old-fashioned, like you say. There'll be a perception when somebody says domestic abuse or domestic violence, somebody will straight away go to a picture in their mind of what they think that looks like. However, we know in society that there is a much broader issue that is feeding into this. This is kind of the outcome is the domestic abuse. It's the impact on people's lives, but we've still got this much broader societal issue. I don't know, do you both feel the same? Do you think
definitely.
it's a much wider issue than...
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
I think for some people as well, when they're in that situation, it's the fear of getting out of it and how they would kind of manage once they've left that situation. It's like, where will I live if I leave, or how will I manage financially and stuff. So it's bringing in services, I think, that can help with that, which we've been doing at 𝗙𝗵𝗵.
Yeah.
We've been providing some of that support. We've had one lady with her young son who've been rehoused, but they literally had nothing. So it's about applying for the grants and things to get them the essential items, the white goods, helping them then to sort of work out how to set up their bills and things, because they've never had to do it before.
Yeah.
So it's giving them that hope, isn't it, that there is sort of life beyond the situation that they're in.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's, again, not talked about enough. We don't, again, it's the shame, isn't it? We place so much shame on it. In some ways, we should be celebrating some of these people who have come out on the other side, and not in the sense of, you've got through this. It's amazing, but again, on that practicalities of actually, this is what your life can look like on the other side. There is support out there. There are other services available. Although, I mean, that's one of my big things, isn't it? I know I've talked about it before. I think the complexity of the services sometimes doesn't help, because if you are a victim of domestic abuse, you'll kind of be held in this corner, but you will still need support from potentially social services, housing, debt management, whatever that might be, depending on an individual circumstance. But again, I think because of the term, quite often people are pigeonholed, aren't they? And kind of it's made a bit more difficult to navigate. So one of the other things I was going to mention is conscious. We do talk about violence against women and girls quite a lot, and obviously as a female-led organisation, some of the support we want to provide, particularly, is for women. But this isn't something that just affects women, and we know that that's on the increase now for men. Is this something that you've both come across in your professional work?
Just recently, we've had a pilot project running where we have actually sort of gone out and we've tracked numbers of people that have come in. Sort of deliberately, we've counted how many people have come in with this issue, and there has been a couple of men. But that's probably something that has been going on and it's been happening, but we've never really picked it up and tracked it.
It's an interesting subject because a lot of people still think that it's male on female, a man and a woman, male perpetrator, female victim in a romantic setting. That's not the case at all. The majority of domestic abuse is that, it's a romantic couple, male perpetrator, female victim. Statistics do show that, and the majority of domestic homicides are female victim, male perpetrator. But the service I work for, we do support males as well, and we get female perpetrators, male victims, and sometimes we have scenarios where it's a family member or a gay couple. And people don't seem to think about it like that sometimes, but it literally can happen in any of those scenarios. So yes, we do support men, but we tend statistically to find that men are not as much physical risk as what a female victim may be, but it does still happen. There have been murders that have happened with female perpetrator, male victim. It's just not as common, but it still happens, and it still, again, needs to be talked about, because that's one of the reasons that I made my book completely gender neutral.
Yeah, I noticed that when you're going through it.
Because the last thing I wanted was someone to turn around to me and say, well, you've just focused on, women being victims and things. And actually, that's not the case. So I've made it completely gender neutral, but I have put in there as well the importance around the fact that women are mainly at risk, because that is factual.
Yeah, and again, that goes into that societal thing. I think there are still some, mind shifts that we need to do, particularly... And it is something that we've touched on before, around like the increase in non-fatal strangulation and things like that. And that, to me, is purely down to, what young men and boys are being fed as what's normal practice and things like that. So that straight away sort of gives a perception of how a woman or girl comes across, doesn't it? And there's that power imbalance straight away. So it will predominantly affect women and girls until we change society in some ways. But I think you're right. I think we do need to think about some of those different settings. I think, you know, the family setting in particular is one that I think is quite interesting, because again, there's so much stigma. And I think if you were to say domestic abuse in a family, people would straight away have a perception of what type of family that would be. And again, I don't think that's always necessarily the case.
It certainly is not the case at all. We support people from every walk of life. People, again, tend to associate it with someone who might come from a background of poverty, for example. That's not true. We've supported celebrities. Yeah. And I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
You know, doctors, solicitors, it doesn't pick and choose. It literally can be anybody can be a victim of it. Yeah. Anyone can be a perpetrator as well.
And again, I think that's the joy of this book, because it's not to simplify it. Because again, I think there's a bit of a perception of if you're more intelligent or deemed to be more successful, like you say, you're not likely to be at risk of this. However, sometimes it's about recognising it, because anyone can be at risk. So you need it laid out in that way to go, oh, actually, yeah, I knew it didn't feel right, but yeah, I think it's this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to remove that stigma. Yeah. That again, you know, I've had clients say to me before, in fact, this was actually not that long ago, only a few weeks ago, one of my clients said, I can't believe this is happening to me. I've got a really good job. I was like, well, how's that relevant?
Yeah.
And she couldn't understand how someone of her status, shall we say, could be a victim until I explained it to her.
And that's quite a worry, really, because if they're thinking like that, it's a case of like they might put up with it longer and things because of the shame of like, I've got this really good job and people can't see that I have had this going on to me. It's quite scary.
Definitely. The shame is always there. They feel like somehow they've caused it. It's their fault, when it's never their fault.
No.
Yeah, and that's kind of the difficulty, isn't it? Because we talk a lot about how other people can recognise the signs, and, you know, particularly in workplaces, there's lots of awareness raising is done. However, you know, in my experience, I talk quite openly about I saw domestic abuse happening as I was growing up, and quite often victims will become great at telling fibs about how things have come to be the way that they are. They've become quite prolific in hiding it because of that shame. So I think we can raise as much awareness as we want, but again, until we smash that stigma around it and kind of normalise it as a thing that we know this happened, we know it's not right. What can we do, you know, as a community more to try and sort of break down some of these barriers?
Definitely. And again, that was another purpose of the book as well. It's not necessarily just for someone who's going through it or a professional. It could be a friend. You know, someone can pick that book up and think, actually, my friend's going through this, or my daughter's going through this. And it can help them to spot the signs from the third-party perspective as well, which, again, can sometimes be quite difficult because it does go on behind closed doors. People do hide it very well. Perpetrators are master manipulators. They can come across as being the most charming, lovely person, successful in life. Behind closed doors, they're a complete monster. And if you can just maybe pick up a couple of little things around maybe some controlling behaviour, it could spot a few red flags early before it becomes too late. Yeah,
I think with our domestic abuse cafe, it's that sort of similar approach. As you say, it's anyone who's been touched by domestic abuse. So we again encourage people who think, because the hardest thing in the world, and again, is it because it is still seen as shameful, which feels like a weird term to use. But the hardest thing in the world is if you saw somebody that you felt was being treated in that way, how do you approach that? How do you ask them about that without them feeling that you're making some kind of judgment on the relationship, making them face challenging things that perhaps they're not ready to yet, and that can ultimately have an impact on your relationship with them. And we all feel like, oh, I will do the right thing. I want to do the right thing, whatever the consequences. However, when you're in that situation, are you going to do that?
It's very hard. It's very hard. And as a professional, I have to make that judgment sometimes as well. Like the service I work for, we're not statutory, we're voluntary. And sometimes people are just not ready to admit it. You know, they may have been referred to us by third parties such as police or social care, but then when we speak to them, they're like, oh, no, I don't want anything, I'm fine. Or they completely minimise everything. No, there's nothing going on. But they're just not there yet. Yeah. And that's fine. We call it the cycle of change, as it's known. I learnt that through my Safe Lives training that I did, and it's like a wheel that we have to look at where the person is on that wheel in terms of how they are responding to their own abuse, and it's like a cycle. And, you know, one moment they can be like, yeah, I know what I've gone through, I need help. And then the next thing is they're back in it again. And it's just something that they have to do in their own time. And I think that's important as well, because they know their situation better than anybody else. They probably know the perpetrator better than anyone else as well. And if it's not the right time and they're almost forced out that situation, it can make things worse as well. So that needs to be remembered.
Do you feel like you come across that quite often in the work you're doing, where people will sort of change their view on things?
Especially if it's a long-term client that we're working with, yes, they will. We'll identify something and it's, we're going to do this. And then they might carry on coming into us, but then they never actually make that change. But then the more worrying thing is when they completely disappear off our radar and they stop engaging with services. It's awful.
Yeah.
And see, and that brings me to Fortuna Female Society a little bit, because I do feel like that is kind of what we're trying to offer is safe spaces where we can have these conversations in a non-judgmental place and without fear of repercussions and things like that. And you know, I say it all the time. You know, I always sort of bang this drum, but you know, even some of that softer touch stuff that we do, if you can get the women in and feeling comfortable and making connections and building trust with people that they feel like they can talk to, you can't put a value on that. There's something about that will always be needed. I would argue in some cases above professional support. There's a place for professional support, but as you say, people straight away will have that barrier up of, I feel like I can't disclose this to you because if I tell you this, you might tell X, Y and Z and it's going to have all these other impacts.
And people do have a fear sometimes of the statutory services like social care and stuff like that, especially if there's children involved, because they don't want the family to be broken up, the risk of children to be taken into care, because they just don't understand what that service is.
I wonder if we could be doing more around promoting the services in themselves. Is that perhaps a key to how we can make this more accessible to people and remove that stigma of actually people accessing it? You know, I don't know if is there much work around that at the moment?
Not that I'm aware of, no. But I think it's important that people aren't necessarily afraid of them, because there's a big fear around social care.
Yeah.
But a lot of people also don't realise that as per the Domestic Abuse Act that was passed in 2021, children who witness domestic abuse between parents are now considered victims in their own right. And I think it's important to remember that as well, because people say, oh, well, he's not hit the kids, he's not abusive to the kids. It's like, but they're in the house when this is going on. They're seeing the effect that this has on you, and it's affecting your parenting because of the, you know, you're not able to give fully because you're being abused yourself. And that's not your fault. That's the perpetrator's fault, but the children are also victims. But when we explain it like that, it does make a lot of sense. And, you know, they seem to lose their fear, but there is this stigma around it. But that's why social care become involved, because the children are just as much at risk sometimes, if not all the time.
Well, and it's the impact, the emotional impact, the mental impact. Sometimes it can be behavioural impact. I know I've spoken to schools because that was very welcome news to me that's been a change, because I think children in those circumstances should be recognised in their own right, and in particular because quite often it would be going on and nobody would know, whereas now if police are involved or any the schools will always know. And you know, I think that's so important, because quite often those kids in the schools, nobody will know what's actually going on at home from if it's not highlighted. And
there needs to be a big spotlight shone on it.
Yeah.
And like the stigma needs to be taken away. It's like, this is going on and we need to help these people.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think we've got a way to go with it though. I think I've spoken to you both separately around the first time I broached the idea of starting the Domestic Abuse Cafe in Halton, and I was met with a little bit of pushback, really, because it was felt like, how will you keep people safe? How can you can't just have something that says domestic abuse and expect people to show up, and you can't. And so, but we can't hide it away, surely.
No.
You know, there's no point in pretending it's not there.
That's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's been hidden away.
Yeah.
Can't do it anymore. No.
I think so.
And actually that safe space of the Domestic Abuse Cafe where people can share experience and things can really make somebody take that positive step, can't they, to actually take action if they're still living in that situation.
Definitely, and for me the other thing is it provides a space for learning. You know, some of the stuff that we hear from people who come to those cafes about their experiences, you know, if we're going to change how these services are interacting, they need to listen to the people that it's impacting.
Absolutely.
So I just want to sort of finish a little bit, because I know we met prior to this, and I think it's amazing, the book. I think it's fantastic. I absolutely love it. But just, a little bit around, because I think what you said to me was, I never anticipated to be an author, and you find it quite difficult,
no.
saying that.
No.
So, how do you feel now? Do you feel like you're about to have your second edition of this come out with some changes? Are you able to openly say you're an author now?
It still feels a bit strange because, I'm no J.K. Rowling, put it that way. But, it's weird because, I technically am an author, but I've literally just put my knowledge into a book. My publishing company did the rest for me. But, so I've got a new edition which comes out on the 1st of March. And it's just a small additional chapter and a brand new cover, which is available on Amazon. And it's also available via Ingram Spark as well, which is where wholesalers can buy it. Libraries, bookstores, places like that. I wanted to make it more widely available. I wanted to try it on Amazon first to see how it was received, and it was very good.
Aww.
So I thought I'm going to make it more widely available now. So it is going to be available from today, 1st of March.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And again, this is What is Domestic Abuse? It will look slightly different when the new one comes out, but I can assure you, honestly, I thought it was a brilliant read. I know professionals that I work with have loved it. People at Fortuna have loved it. I think it's a brilliant thing. And like you say, it's a step in the right direction of smashing the stigma a little bit.
Definitely.
It needs to be out there everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, please buy it then.
Okay. Oh, well, that's great. Thanks very much. So I hope we've answered today why the FFS we need to still be talking about domestic abuse. I think that was a really great conversation. So thank you, Jo.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it.
We're the Fortuna Female Society. Here's roar. We're the Fortuna Female Society, and much more. Woo, 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 woo. Thank you for the women who catch you when you fall, who always have your back and will answer before you call. Thank you for the women, for the sacrifice you make, for stepping off the sidelines, brave enough to lead the way. Thank you for
Hype Podcast Studios.